It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Ahoy, and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. Call me Isaac.
I'm Alexis, still.
Call me Kiana.
Call me Leora.
I'm the only one who's confident in my name. But
Just don't call me late to dinner.
Hey.
I filed a fair amount of paperwork to get people to call me Alexis, so I think I'm just going to announce that as my name.
Fair enough. As you may have determined already, we are discussing a little book called Moby Dick this week. Kiana, would you be so kind as to give us the plot of Moby Dick?
I would love to.
All right.
The events of Moby Dick are related to us after the fact by a narrator who calls himself Ishmael, who is definitely not just Herman Melville. As a young man, he decides to ship out for 3 years on a Nantucket whaling vessel named the Pequod. Once the ship sets sail, it becomes obvious that their captain, Ahab, is a madman obsessed with revenge on one specific sperm whale, Moby Dick.
The white whale.
Yes, who bit off Ahab's leg on his last voyage. The crew pledges an oath to hunt Moby Dick with their captain, and off they go around the world. Things go very badly for everyone involved. Last little bit here, because this book is really difficult to summarize, but along the way, Ishmael introduces dozens of crew members, including his textual husband Queequeg, and elucidates for us landlubbers the majesty and cruelty of both sperm whales and whaling.
Thank you, Kiana. That was very well done.
That was excellent.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Are there wizards in this book?
I mean, there's a whale.
No. Captain Ahab is a
Captain
wizard.
Ahab is clearly the wizard.
Captain Ahab is one of the most wizardly wizards we've ever wizarded.
Yes, and besides, it is a well-known fact that all whales are lesbians.
Well, this is interesting. My take on the lesbians is that so there are no women in this book except for one of the many comedy duos very early on, a landlady and her chambermaid. But my argument for lesbians would be that Ishmael and Queequeg embody what would in another time, in a more modern time, be a lesbian archetype, and is not Queequeg Xena and is not Ishmael Gabrielle.
So in other words, what you're saying is that Moby Dick is just proto-Xena Uber, a term that we'd only recently learned.
They do sort of U-Haul, don't they?
They really
They
U-haul.
absolutely do.
It's like a date that turns into living together almost immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it starts with a really classic, but there was only one bed. And by the next night, they're married.
There literally was only one bed.
They speed run enemies to lovers because they start out, about to try to kill each other, and only the landlady's timely intervention saves Ishmael. And then, yes, by the next day, I think it's the following morning, they are textually, or the morning that one day later, that they're textually husbands and have pooled their money and have sworn to travel together.
Yes. So I think I declare this to be Wizards versus Lesbians. And
This is mainline.
I'd say I declare this to be mainline Wizards
Aye.
versus Lesbians. Moby Dick is not a lesbian because Moby Dick's place in the story is to be an even bigger wizard than Ahab.
Oh, but you were just disagreeing with me when I said that the whale was a wizard.
I thought you said the whale was a lesbian.
Well, initially I said the whale was a wizard, and then you said, no, Ahab is the wizard.
Look,
No.
guys, Moby Dick contains every archetype imaginable.
Exactly. Moby Dick is both the wizard and the lesbian.
And the antithesis of all these things. All right, but so last year on the Wizzlies, right?
Yes.
Just for some background, we were all talking about books that we'd read that year.
Yes.
And I had listened to an audiobook of Moby Dick for the first time and was sort of gushing about it. And then everyone promised to read it, right?
By the time the next Wesley's roll
Yes.
around, yes.
By the time the next Wizzlies, and we have not yet recorded the next Wizzlies.
Yeah.
So-
Impressively, everyone has kept their oath, much
Well,
like the
most of
crew of the
us.
Pequod. Well, that's
I'm
okay.
afraid that the who I'm going to call the other member of the Wizards versus Lesbians Auxiliary wasn't able to join us, but I argued that some men were lesbians in Lee's honor. So Lee is here.
I'm saluting you in real life.
Much like how one crew member of the Pequod was not able to, to buy in on Ahab's foolish vow, self-destructive vow.
And only I escaped
Starbuck.
to tell the... Yes. Poor Starbuck. All right. So, but yes, that's the background. That's why we're doing this.
Well, that's why we started reading it.
Having duly fulfilled our oath, we are now exceedingly eager to talk about this book because, and this is the answer to why you should read it, it turns out it's really good.
Yeah.
Who
It's
knew?
weird,
Good.
huh?
It's so good.
It's actually so good.
It's why when we were talking about Pale Fire, instantly Nabokov being Cat Weaver's wizard, Melville is Kiana's wizard, which is what brought it up in the
Oh, right.
in the
We all
Wizzlies
get
episode.
one pet dead white male author.
Exactly. And but yeah, no, it turns out, as we said with Pale Fire, that you should read this book because it's a fucking masterpiece.
It really is.
More so than Pale Fire. Like, this is the great American novel. The fact that people are still trying to write a great American novel at this point is silly. They just don't like what this has to say about America. Mm-hmm. And more on that later.
Well, and I suppose, you could try to write a great American novel that does contain women and ideally even lesbians.
Oh, yeah.
So that's your challenge, writers of the great American novel. If yours is not about women, preferably lesbians, it cannot compete with Moby Dick. Because that is basically the thing that Moby Dick lacks.
You're absolutely correct. Is anything more specific about why you should read this novel? It's way funnier than people say it is. That's one
It's
thing.
way
Yeah, that
funnier.
was on my list.
It is even gayer than people say it is.
Oh my god.
I warned, I don't know if I should use the word warned, but I stressed this to Isaac multiple times, and yet the sperm chapter still caught him off guard.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, it's not even, we can talk more about this. But just why should you read this book? You have probably heard that it is extremely gay, and I am here to tell you it is significantly gayer than that.
Yes. People also tell you that it's long and boring. It is long.
It is long.
It's long.
And how boring you find it you will need to want to learn about the sperm whale.
If you are the kind of person, like, say, anybody on this podcast, who enjoys listening to a good friend tell you about their hyperfixation, then you will enjoy this book because Ishmael is really, really excited to tell you all about his hyperfixation. And so that means that we get some chapters of, like, things happening on the ship, and then we get chapters of, here is a quick review of art history as relates to the Leviathan, and here's a quick...
And here's why the Leviathan is absolutely a whale.
Here's 10 pages of a meditation on my thesis that things that are white have positive associations, but things that are already scary, and then you make them white, make them even scarier. And it's just... I like Ishmael's voice. It's a great person to be listening to.
He is so funny and charming, yes.
And it opens with one of the best descriptions of being in a depressive funk that I have ever read.
Yes, you've also wanted to knock people's hats off in the street.
Absolutely. And actually, that is I perhaps post spoiler zone, I want to talk a lot about how you can basically pick almost any random sentence from this novel and analyze the heck out of it.
Yes.
Absolutely. No, he is a huge Shakespeare fan, if you couldn't tell by Ahab's constant monologuing.
This is. I mean, I said this was Xena fan fiction. It's Shakespeare fan fiction. But,
it's also Shakespearean in the way Melville uses language, right?
Absolutely.
It's so dense and has all these like surface level funny, like there's quips and there's jokes, and then he takes something and spins it, and suddenly it's like this beautiful tapestry of words.
Right, like every sentence is so constructed and well constructed, and but not like predictably. It's just it's really amazing.
For a book that I have known the very basic plot outline and how it ends, for basically as long as I can remember, it sure managed to surprise me a lot throughout.
There is that. I will come back to this also later, but I think that the way that Moby Dick has been constructed in the American psyche, and the fact that that has so little to do with what this book actually is unsurprising. One last thing that I wanted to say was that Ishmael does info dump onto you, but if you're not interested in whales at all, everything that he says about whales is also a metaphor in addition to being about whales. So you can go at it from that angle as well if you want. Why shouldn't you read this book? As we've mentioned, there are no women in this book, and Ishmael is really not interested in women at all.
No, at all. I have to say the main reason why you should not read this book is that it will turn you into yet another person who can't shut up about Moby Dick. And the problem is, if you haven't read Moby Dick, you don't understand because, as Isaac has said, it occupies a very specific place in our culture. Mm-hmm. And so you have probably heard people unable to shut up about Moby Dick, and you're like, why are they unable to shut up about what is just a very long, weird novel about whales? And you will become this person if you read this novel.
I was reading this novel in synagogue instead of praying, and somebody noticed and came up to me later and was like, I saw you were reading Moby Dick. Isn't it so good? And 3 other people came up and were like, what are you talking about? And we were like, Moby Dick. And they were all like, oh, is it good? We were both like, oh my God.
Right. It will also turn you into the sort of person who, reads Moby Dick in the synagogue.
Yes. Or the sort of person who will angrily defend Moby Dick when it is, casually dismissed by somebody as being a long, boring book about a penis thrusting out of the ocean, which I think happened in a Neil Gaiman story.
I mean, I suppose the other reason not to read this book is if you have a whale phobia, or if cruelty to animals is so deeply distressing to you that you can't just skim over those passages.
Yeah, if you have problems with the water and what it can do to you.
Oh yes, I mean, are you giving content warnings?
I guess we moved on to content warnings.
Category.
Yeah, let's transition now into content warnings.
Yes, so content warning: violence, death,
drowning,
horrific cruelty to animals on an industrial scale,
the open ocean,
on a pre-industrial scale, actually, and that does matter.
Period typical racism. That's
why you shouldn't read Moby Dick. It's very good, but it is incredibly racist.
Well, yes, while at the same time being as critical as racism as it is possible to be under the circumstances. But again, yes, there's a lot of racism that happens in this book.
Yeah, I would say the book is constantly examining its own what it has to say about race.
CF,
we can
the
get
chapter
into that.
on whiteness that Leora brought up, which we're going to come back to probably multiple times.
Cannibalism.
Oh, cannibalism. A lot of cannibalism, but honestly a fairly positive depiction of cannibalism.
Yeah.
Yes. I have more to say about that later, too.
I admit, when I got to the cannibal bit, I was like,
oh, yeah.
Oh, so this is classic Wizzlies.
Yes, this is classic Chinese literature. But yes, and gaslighting. I think Ahab gaslights the crew.
Oh, absolutely.
Kiana's giving me a face. But
I think there sure is a lot here. Speaking of themes in the great American novel of, wow, it really sucks when one dude is in charge of everybody and he's crazy.
And also some gays absolutely do get buried.
It's a tragedy.
Yeah, this book is...
It's a tragedy. Content warning, it's a tragedy.
Exactly.
This book is a Shakespearean tragedy, in fact.
It sure is.
With a lot of Shakespeare. So, that being said, anything else before we go to the spoiler zone? Is it possible to spoil Moby Dick? Yes, actually.
Let's dive into it.
Spoiler zone. I guess we'll be there soon. There is no more preamble. It's useless to try.
Oh, I have one more reason not to read it. If you're really set on your whale facts being correct
And accurate.
Perhaps give this one a pass. Some of Ishmael's whale facts are in fact correct, but some of them are like, well, obviously this is true.
Some of them are incorrect, even by the standards of the time, as Ishmael will cheerfully inform you. However, I think that if you're the sort of person who needs all their will facts to be accurate, you will derive a great deal of satisfaction from fact-checking this book.
That is true. And when they are incorrect, it is in the service of the whale metaphor. So, you can enjoy it from that angle as well. Although I must repeat, having said that multiple times, that it is not just a metaphor, it is also a giant animal that lives in the ocean. Yes, it's a whale.
And will kill you.
Yes.
It was, in fact, apparently based on a historical whale.
It was, yeah.
Yeah. We'll put the name of that whale in the jingle right now.
Excellent.
I love Mocha. I love Dick. That's my mnemonic and it makes it stick. Old Mocha Dick, that whale was a prick. There is no racial content to this song.
Its name is Mocha Dick.
That's right.
It's not... I'm glad he changed it.
Yes,
this is a good spot for a jingle.
Yes.
So, in order to navigate this giant book, we have all brought sentences or passages that we particularly enjoyed or that particularly stuck with us to discuss. And so we will all in turn talk about a passage or recite a passage perhaps, and then talk about the issue that brings up. Will you give us let's see. No, I'll start if unless anybody else wants to.
Start, Isaac.
Yeah, go for it.
So, in re Ahab being a wizard. Now it's time for whale fact number 1. Did you know that, like killer whales, sperm whales are among the only mammals where the females stay as part of family groups even after they're done calving to sort of have a matriarchal role in the community? I thought that was interesting. Fashioned at last into an arrowy shape and welded by Perth to the shank, the steel soon pointed the end of the iron, and as the blacksmith was about giving the barbs their final heat, prior to tempering them, he cried to Ahab to place the water cask near. No water for that. I want it of the true death temper. Ahoy there, Tashtego, Queequeg, Dagu. What say ye, pagans? Will ye give me as much blood as will cover the barb? Holding it high up, a cluster of dark nods replied, yes. 3 punctures were made in the heathen flesh, and the white whale's barbs were then tempered. Ego non baptizo te in nomine patris, sed in nomine diaboli! Deliriously howled Ahab, as the malignant iron scorchingly devoured the baptismal blood. So he's a wizard. Hello?
So I just meant like an individual sentence that, that particularly stood out to us. But that works too.
Thank you. Yeah, so no, this is Ahab forging his unholy spear with which he's going to kill the white whale. Ahab.
It is in fact the harpoon.
The harpoon.
There's lances
harpoon
or spears
and
there's harpoons, but yes.
So this is a hell of a weapon.
Yeah.
Kind of a lance of Longinus. And in fact, it brought to mind the spearing of the white whale brought to mind Evangelion and Lilith's white blubbery form being speared by the lance of Longinus.
Mm-hmm. I also have to point out that they use explicitly magical items in the forging. They use horseshoes and nails, like iron nails.
And razors.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ahab is invoking... Ahab is basically doing the last... it's the last refuge of the failed patriarch. So Ahab was going along fine, being a Nantucket whaler, which Melville posits as being like the whitest of white men, basically. This is the person who is
and like the most the true American hero.
Yeah, because what is the Nantucket whaler doing? It's getting oil, and oil in that world, as it is in this, is the thing that makes the world go round. But we didn't
lubricates everything. Ishmael tells us.
Yes,
it does.
He's not wrong.
And it was also used to anoint kings.
Mm-hmm. But before we were getting our petro oil from Texas, we were getting our whale from the heads of sperm whales. And it is supplying the world with this oil that makes Nantucket rich, that makes America rich, makes the world go round. And it is the rationalizing of the world and the preparing of the way for colonialism and missionary work that the whalers do by going everywhere in the world to extract the substance that essentially has created the system of the world that exists, per Ishmael.
Yeah, Ishmael at least is making the case that these guys occupy the cultural niche that cowboys would later come to occupy.
Yeah,
like the sort of true symbol of America, spreading American imperialism throughout the world.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, sort of cowboys who are also oil men,
Well, it's Texas.
Right.
Nantucket is the Texas of its era.
That's true. We just went through Texas, and Kiana had an immediate visceral negative reaction to it, which might be of interest to some. But
Are you trying to put me at war with the entire state of Texas?
I'll edit that out. It's all right. But
I still say it's because you're Alaskan.
I don't know. I walked into a Buc-ee's and the fear of God was put in me. But regardless, Ahab was a leader of these cowboys, and then something happened, and he went grimdark. And what happened was that he ran into a bigger white than he was, in the form of the
very
white
symbolic.
whale. And it turned out that he was not the master of the world, because this motherfucking whale just ate his leg like it was nothing and went away. And
yeah, left him to die.
Yeah. It's like the whale didn't even care, you guys.
Can you believe that?
I know.
Can
It's
you
so
believe the
rude.
audacity of that
it's
whale?
so rude. Like, didn't even acknowledge Ahab's status in the world. Just like, and the whale can't even swallow that leg. That leg is still in his mouth. He did it out of spite and then forgot
Purely
about
out
it.
of
on
spite.
purpose,
Yeah.
for sure.
So he's going back to get his revenge on this whale, who he thinks is absolutely as obsessed with him as he is with the whale, which is not true.
It's textually not true, which is one of the great moments in this book.
Yes. But he needs to tap into the thing that failed patriarchs do when they are trying to get back on their feet, which is magic, blood and soil and magic, and the ancient powers and the heathen powers, the dark people that he has turned into his subalterns here, and their blood and their he's turning his face away from Christ and civilization. Well, actually, not Christ. This book is incredibly Old Testament, which is another thing that I want to talk about.
It's a very Christian.
It's
Old
very
Testament.
it's a very Christian Old Testament as opposed to Hebrew Bible.
I assume that's why Isaac said Old
Yeah.
Testament and not.
Not.
Right, I just
Right.
have a visceral need that when anybody says Old Testament, I usually have to correct them. But in this case, I agree that it's accurate, but I still needed to...
That's completely understandable. But yes, Melville, if I may, was raised a Calvinist, so he has a very determinist view of these things, right? And also, as you say, a very Old Testament view of these things.
Yes.
And you can feel that throughout this entire book. There's ill omens, basically from the very beginning of the book.
There's so many ill
There's
omens.
a comical amount of omens. I love, up until the very last moment, there's omens, Starbuck grabbing Ahab by the shirt, screaming in his face, "Please, Captain, look at all these fucking omens."
The actual prophet Elijah shows up near the
Yes.
beginning.
Oh
to
no,
be like,
the
you
IRL,
should not
yes,
do this.
Yes,
And then you get the Archangel Gabriel being like,
You do.
Do not do this.
you do, yeah.
And in response, Ahab says in Latin, "I do not baptize you in the name of the Father, but in the name of the devil," when he makes his magical harpoon. Ahab is willing to
become a Satanist.
I mean, Ahab is willing to become incredibly edgy. But sorry, go ahead.
He is. One of the lines that I considered bringing is like a page and a half before what you just quoted, where Ahab just gets really pissed that the blacksmith also has an extremely tragic backstory. And like we get this moment where we're preparing for this strange magical blood baptism of a harpoon, and the blacksmith also has been disabled by some complicated tragedy in his past, is like covered in so many scars that he's like, the fire doesn't bother me because I'm all scar anyway and the feeling is less there. And Ahab is just like, what's wrong with you? Why are you not mad too?
Right. Why haven't you allowed your trauma to take over your life?
I am impatient of all misery and others that is not mad.
Exactly.
And then proceeds to show us just how mad he is. And I just really appreciated that moment of, this book is not short on opportunities to give Ahab a foil or 2 or 5.
Yeah. And this is, by the way, like standard constant wizard behavior. Like, as far as Ahab is concerned, the world ends with Ahab. His obsession is with the end of the world and the apocalypse, and that specifically means the end of him. And so it's like, oh, he's going to kill his entire crew doing it? Of course. I mean, that goes without saying.
But in classic wizard form, he believes himself to be immortal, and he has, interpreted this prophecy he is given by easily the most racist caricature, in like the one totally unexaminedly racist caricature in the book.
True. Not much to say to help with that one, I'm afraid.
And gives him this prophecy of when he will die, and it's real obvious where this is going, even if you don't know much about boats. And yet, somehow, Ahab is convinced that this means that he is functionally immortal.
Well, part of him is convinced of this. The other part is busy doing Shakespearean monologues about his own impending death.
Well, of course. But again, this is actually very wizardly, is to try to want both your immortality and your tragedy.
Yes. But Ahab is confronted with The blacksmith is a recovering alcoholic who lost everything in his life and is now making his way, Harry Dubois style. And Ahab looks at the blacksmith who is trying to just live his life now and is like, what the fuck is wrong with you? He's offended that somebody could undergo a trauma and not let it take over their life. So I think I actually said that already, but...
As did Lyra. Are we going to have to introduce a Disco Elysium counter? We might, which is going to be terrible because we're both going to do it. But to just accompany the Homestuck counter.
Yeah, no, I had another point that I wanted to make there, but it petered out. I'm sorry.
This is a side note, but I remember when I first played Disco Elysium, I was really struck by a moment in... I promise this is relevant to Moby Dick.
No, I totally believe you. It's just like, it's not just Isaac with this time. It's all of us,
except all of us.
Kind of Leora.
I could do it, too.
It's a challenge.
No, but I'm genuinely curious where you're going with this.
I believe it's the moment where you are dancing like a madman at the disco, and you pass out, and what is it? The spinal cord speaks to you. It says, through the
unformed skulls of your spine.
Skulls of your spine.
Yeah.
And when Melville is talking about the whale's skull, he brings up the fact that, quote, there's an old German, it's not actually a quote, I'm paraphrasing, there's an old German conceit that the spine is a series of unformed skulls.
Which there isn't, he just made that up.
He made that up.
Actually, but there is Jewish midrash that the spine, that if all that remains of you is the one vertebrae, that can still, a new human can still be grown from that in the world to come.
What do you know?
How about that?
Anyway, I'm pretty sure they read Moby Dick, is what I'm getting at.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
I have not looked it up, but I'll be really disappointed if somebody hasn't written their Moby Dick Disco Elysium crossover fic, honestly.
Okay.
All right, we're done.
Yeah. So, but
This
anyway,
podcast is going to be 5 hours long.
you know, I mean, we have to stop because because of the Super Bowl halftime show.
I have to see Kendrick.
Yes.
Okay,
So,
whose
so-
quote is next?
Yes.
Now it's time for whale fact number 2. Did you know that a blue whale's arteries are big enough that a small child could climb around inside them? I said sperm whale the first time I tried to record this because Ishmael brainwashed me into thinking that sperm whales were the most important whales.
I have one that's that I didn't actually want to share for deep examination, but I just wanted to share it because it was the moment where this book completely won me over.
Yeah.
Which is fairly, I mean, really, the book completely won me over from the first page when Ishmael is like, do you ever just want to walk into the ocean? Do you ever just want to punch people's hats off? But this one sentence, just for the rhythm of the sentence, won me over. Which was, in New Bedford, fathers, they say, give whales for dowers to their daughters and portion off their nieces with a few porpoises apiece.
The man will indulge in alliteration.
It's so wonderful read aloud. If you...
William Hootkin's reading
Yes,
is the one
William
that we read
Hootkin's,
on
thank you.
our road trip, and I heartily recommend it. There are a number of good ones. That this is the kind of text where, like Shakespeare, a great actor can take it and give it a lot of different spins. As long as you make Ahab a complete lunatic, there's no way to do it.
He has to sound kind of like a cartoon pirate. Yeah.
Yeah, but
But yes, Alexis, that is such a euphonious sentence. Thank you.
and actually that might be a spin-off into the way that prose is used in this book.
Yes, because I did want to talk about the opening as well, but say what you were going to say.
Oh, because one of the things about Ahab that makes him the wizard, or many of the things about Ahab that make him the wizard are in the meta text rather than in the text. One of them is that there's no Shakespeare till he shows up. He brings the Shakespeare with him. Nobody is doing Mad King monologues until we actually see Ahab, which is a remarkably long distance into this book.
Right. And
Yes.
even later when the other characters have their own monologues, it's always in response to either what Ahab is saying or doing.
Yeah, you get a lot of
You
good
get,
soliloquies.
here's Ahab's soliloquy, and the chapter was not titled that. I just referred to it as a soliloquy, and then, 100 pages later, you get a chapter that's Ahab's soliloquy.
Number 75.
Followed by Starbucks soliloquy.
Right.
And then Stubbs has a soliloquy, and you can just... It's so Shakespearean that, my image of this was of a stage with, Ahab getting the spotlight.
He paces the planks like a actor walks the stage. It's much is made of his slow pacing and his turning with his peg. But yeah, so the tone of the beginning of this book is almost like a slice of life light novel, in comparison to where it goes. There's a lot of comedy throughout, but it's mostly sort of funny business and amusing bedroom mishaps and chowder humor. We get a little preview in the form of the preacher.
That's right.
Who gives us the story of Jonah in what, Leora, you might say is quite a Christian way.
Oh, yes.
But who gives us the story of Jonah and presages what the tone of the story is going to be like. But after Ishmael leaves the church, basically being like, well, that was weird. We sort of just go on then and have comedy duo after comedy duo of fun, light characters until Ahab arrives and the entire tone of the text changes.
The preacher's sermon is primarily about the resisting of God's will and its futility, but there's a second part about the telling of the tale. Ishmael lost his love, he lost his everything to tell the truth about the whale. And Melville must have known that his career was blown by the telling of the tale. Work forever in the counting houses of the state that binds loves you, dreading every working morning, never lived to find out if your story made it home.
Right, and even like they're on the ship for a while before Ahab really makes his appearance.
Yes.
You get a lot of foreshadowing about this guy.
And our poor idiot Ishmael doesn't actually, like, there's a bit when he goes, wait, who's Ahab? And everyone's like, what? Because this naive dude signed on for 3 years without even learning the name of the dictator who was going to be in sole control of his world for 3 years. It's just like, oh, honey.
Yes. Oh, the other metatextual thing I remembered. The other metatextual thing about that Ahab does is that he eats Ishmael's place in the text.
Yes.
Like, Ishmael is our main character up until Ahab arrives. And then when Ahab arrives, Ishmael is just less and less and less present until by the time the book ends, he is essentially not even a character anymore until he ends up bobbing on Queequeg's coffin. Except
he still remains a character because of his voice and also because of his random asides where he goes off on this thing about hanging out in South America and retelling this specific story.
I love those cartoon Spaniards. Melville loves to dress up his audience in unflattering costumes. Also pretend I can tremolo pick, okay?
Yes. But like as a person on the ship who's like
we don't get the day-to-day
yeah.
funny business.
Mm-hmm.
Right, he fades out of the story.
We get a whole stuff about, like, how those decadent northerners have crow's nests, but their boats don't. They just, like, have to stand on the mast. But after that, you don't get, and I was standing on the mast and saw Moby Dick.
I would even say that all those asides, I don't know how to describe it. The rhythm of the book, I think I told Isaac this once we finished it, but rereading it, I get this sense that these inserted asides are kind of like him trying to postpone the inevitable.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, it makes sense. This is because at the end his husband dies.
Yeah.
And also, Isaac, I think you pointed this out, Queequeg also is nowhere to be found on that last day, except maybe in an aside, like Tashtego, I think, becomes
suddenly Tashtego gets
the
center stage.
harpooner who gets, like, his death sequence.
And
it's almost like it's too painful to touch and name.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think that's why the whole sequence with Queequeg's coffin is in there, because Ishmael can't deal with Queequeg's death directly, so he constructs this sort of at one remove death for Queequeg, where he can sit by his bedside and mourn him like he should have been able to. You know?
It's
so good.
It kills me.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, no, the feeling of Ishmael / Melville himself being at such a traumatic remove by the time the end of the book comes around is like suffocating.
And the epilogue is nothing, right? I think you were even a little taken aback, Isaac, when we finished it. He's like, oh yeah, and I survived. Well, that's the end. Bye.
Now I'm a broken man on a Halifax pier, the last of Barrett's privateers.
Yeah.
How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now.
It's one page. It opens with a quote from Job. And then the final sentence is that
he's an orphan, right?
It was the devious cruising Rachel that in her retracing search after her missing children only found another orphan.
Yes.
Because it's, extremely symbolic also that the last ship that they meet is Rachel, who is known for crying for her children.
I love all the ships they meet as various foils. I especially love when they're all in horrible, like, they're down in the dumps, everyone is extremely grim, and they meet the Bachelor, which is the ship where they are, like, flush with whale oil. They have, like, island girls hanging off the rigging. They're, like, partying and drinking, like, what's up, Ahab? And he's like so angry and so over it. And all the sailors on the Pequod kind of give it like longing looks as it sails past.
It's like, well, that's not this trip.
Now it's time for whale fact number 3. Ishmael wonders how it seems that the whales can communicate to each other without emitting any sound. In fact, it turns out they were emitting sound, just not the kind of sound that human ears could hear. And of course, this can't be in the text, but there's an interesting parallel to be drawn there about the savage noises of these peoples that they're encountering, whether they can really be considered human speech, and whether they would have counted the whale speech as human if they'd been able to hear it, or if the whales would have had to have converted to Protestantism first.
Leora, I don't know if it's time for your sentence or if this is related yet, but I am interested in your reading of the biblical allusions in this book and the ways in which they're Christian takes on the Old Testament rather than Jewish discussion.
Yeah, so I will actually read my section here because it is related to your question, and then I will talk more about it. This is right towards the beginning, where Ishmael and Queequeg have like made up and are now sort of feeling out the other's perspective on the world, and they're like married now, but what does that mean? And Queequeg invites Ishmael to worship his idol with him. So we get this bit. I was a good Christian, born and bred in the bosom of the infallible Presbyterian Church. How then could I unite with this wild idolater in worshipping his piece of wood? But what is worship, thought I? Do you suppose now, Ishmael, that the magnanimous God of heaven and earth, pagans and all included, can possibly be jealous of an insignificant bit of black wood? Impossible. But what is worship? To do the will of God, that is worship. And what is the will of God? To do to my fellow man what I would have my fellow man do unto me.
It's Hillel again!
That is the will of God. Now Queequeg is my fellow man, and what do I wish that this Queequeg would do to me? Why, unite with me in my particular Presbyterian form of worship. Consequently, I must then unite with him in his. Ergo, I must turn idolater.
I'm sorry I'm laughing, but like Kiana and I were giving each other eyes over, what do I wish he would do to me? And then when the answer was, unite with me in my particular form of Presbyterian worship, we're like, I've never heard it called that before. But
No, I mean, and then, like, the next paragraph right after that ends with this, like, thing where they're going to sleep together, and he meditates on how wonderful it is that old couples can lie and chat over old times till nearly morning, and is...
Thus then, in our heart's honeymoon, lay I and Queequeg, a cozy, loving pair.
okay.
Which, like, if I were picking one sentence, I might have gone with that. But I wanted to talk about the themes of Christianity throughout this book. And that particular section with these leaps of logic, it is extremely explicit over and over again that, yes, in fact, God is quite jealous of of a bit of wood, and does not want you worshiping idols.
Yes, it's I believe it's the first commandment.
It's right.
More important than murder.
Well, they're not in order of importance.
Yes, I know. It's
Side thing. But throughout, for a book that is extremely steeped with real Christian understandings of what's going on in the Old Testament, we get this moment where what Ishmael is doing is explicitly rejecting the Old Testament do not do idol worship for the more Jesus do unto others thing, in defense of his idolatry, which is just totally fascinating to me as a logical leap. And I think also leads to a lot of other really interesting things throughout in terms of what's going on with God in this book. What's going on with, there is a itinerant guy named Elijah who tells them they meet the Archangel Gabriel, or a guy who thinks that's what he is. It's left to our discretion there. And of course, Jonah and Job are both referenced quite a lot as two biblical stories that involve the Leviathan.
As you pointed out, what Elijah and what Gabriel are doing is saying, don't do this. But
they're not saying don't do this about him and Queequeg.
No.
There's this sort of idea that small, loving domestic idolatry is fine. It's the idolatry that causes you and your husband to throw your lives away for somebody else's obsession.
Well, this is this is like...
This is the core of the book. There's so much here. We could spend hours talking about this. But if I may, my quote actually ties into that as well.
Go for it.
Sort of the other side of that coin.
Now it's time for whale fact number 4. In the text, Ahab's relationship with Pip is ambiguous, but if my captain brought the simple cabin boy to stay in his cabin, I know what I would think. I guess that's not a whale fact, per se.
So for context, there's a young black man on the ship named Pip. He's another one of Ahab's foils. He's a fascinating character, and Ahab's relationship is really weird, and there's so much there.
Ahab's Shakespearean influence created a Shakespearean fool on the ship, and that's Pip.
But he's also canonically very intelligent and
Wise Fool is very much a Shakespearean thing.
Yeah. Anyway, all I'm saying is he's a very interesting character. But so at one point, Pip jumps off a whaling boat one too many times and is left behind in the open ocean. He goes crazy, so to speak. And this is a quote from when that's happening. So he's talking about how his soul is not drowned entirely, rather carried down alive to wondrous depths, where strange shapes of the unwarped primal world glided to and fro before his passive eyes, and the miser merman wisdom revealed his hoarded heaps, and among the joyous, heartless, ever-juvenile eternities, Pip saw the multitudinous, God omnipresent coral insects that out of the firmament of waters heaved the colossal orbs. So there's romanticism versus Enlightenment thinking. There's
deism is present.
There's deism. But there's also there's a nothingness under everything, which Ahab can't abide. He can't abide the thought that it's random. He can't abide the thought that Moby Dick doesn't actually hate him. And so Ishmael's kind of back and forth with Christianity and paganism is almost eluding the issue, which is this nothingness, which is this kind of postmodern erasure of a center or anything to hold on to.
Yeah.
And Pip kind of goes crazy in this in that passage. It's kind of presented poetically because he sees these coral insects, which is such a wonderful turn of phrase. They're just pushing dirt around, right? Yeah. And that creates the cosmos. It's there's nothing here.
it is not unlike the thing that Lovecraft is reacting to and is afraid of.
Oh yeah, you could read Moby Dick as a what's it called?
Cosmic horror.
Cosmic horror.
Yeah.
And Moby Dick is absolutely cosmic horror.
But yes. So let's talk about, and that's a good jumping off. But I realize that we're not actually talking about these things in detail because we don't have time. This could be a 12-hour podcast. We're going to have to move around a lot. But let's move on to race then, since we talked about it, because the other thing that that Ishmael sort of happily rationalizing away all of his Christian precepts is very similar to the way that he happily rationalized away his racism a few pages earlier. When
You mean rationalized it out of existence, kind of, not rationalized it
Right, he's not creating a rationale for being racist. He's in a society where being racist is so obvious that he has to talk himself out of like these racist beliefs.
Right, but crucially, he does it really fast.
He does do it really fast.
It's very much like Huck Finn being like, why do I deal with... He's like, oh yeah, well, okay, Queequeg. He's a Polynesian George Washington.
Right. The fact that he gives us this very phrenological analysis.
Which was the style at the time.
Yeah, or it's like, he may be a savage, but he's savage royalty. And thus,
and he's so handsome, you guys.
And really, it would be great if we could just sort of be in bed together. So I'm going to quickly construct this really obviously rickety and silly ladder of logic and I'm just going to use it to jump over racism, and then I'm going to use it to jump over Christianity, because what I really want to do is sleep with this man.
He says better a sober cannibal than a drunk Christian.
Yes.
Right? I think the first night.
And I think that, like, this does so many different things at once again, and part of it is like, man, the whole scaffold that holds up our whiteness and the rationale behind our colonialism and our missionary work, boy, it's easy to just tip that over with one finger, isn't it, when I see something that I want?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Or when you encounter something for the first time that challenges it.
But he's making way more concessions. This is less... I don't think this is entirely about, I see something that I want. I think that this is... I think that, his own desire is causing him to challenge his beliefs. And, also, like, this guy is really depressed. So I think his beliefs are pretty easily shaken.
It's true, but I'm not saying that it's because he wants to possess Queequeg, because he couldn't, that much is very obvious from the start.
No, if anything, Queequeg possesses him.
Yes, Queequeg takes possession of him.
He gives him money and tells him to go find them a job.
Like, oh,
they're married and Ishmael is the wife. There is no question about that.
Yeah.
This moody twink.
Right. This is very obvious.
Oh, I love the part where Queequeg jumps overboard to save that guy, and then Ishmael says he, like, clung to him for the rest of that little boat ride.
Yeah.
Or the part where, what was Queequeg doing where Ishmael spent a lot of time talking about how good he looked
Alexis
in shorts?
brought this up.
I also pulled out this sentence.
Now it's time for whale fact number 5. Female sperm whales almost exclusively eat squid, while the males have been documented to prey on bottom-dwelling fish, like sharks and rays and cod and hake. Scientists say that this is because males are gross.
On the occasion in question, Queequeg figured in the Highland costume, a shirt and socks, in which, to my eyes at least, he appeared in uncommon advantage, and no one had a better chance to observe him, as will presently be seen. And, okay, so there's two things going on here. First of all, like, clearly he's checking out his husband's legs. Great. But I was like, where have I heard this sentence? And I realized, or this phrase, uncommon advantage, and I realized... It's from Pride and Prejudice, where Darcy is saying, your figures appear to the greatest advantage in walking. Like, this is very much the language of checking someone out.
Of the period,
yeah.
No, that is extremely, like, I hope that if you are listening to this podcast without having read the book, that you understand that we're not exaggerating. We haven't even gotten to the sperm squishing, the sperm squeezing, the sperm squishing.
The thing is that, like, the sperm squishing, partly it's funny because it's the word sperm a lot, but the thing, like, I feel like all these everyday domestic moments where they're just, like, cuddling or weaving something together, or, Ishmael's clinging to Queequeg or checking out his legs. Like, to me, that's what makes this book genuinely super gay. It's not like the use of the word sperm over and over again, although that's funny, and it would have been funny, for him. It is the fact that he begins to squeeze his fellow's hands because they're so soft and moisturized. He starts looking into their eyes. And he starts looking directly into their eyes.
Love for mankind.
As he squeezes their lotioned up hands in this big bucket of sperm, which he keeps calling sperm. I wish we could stay here
forever in this sperm.
This is the happiest I've ever been when I'm with my hands in the sperm, squeezing your hands.
But that is more of a philosophical
And when he says that it wouldn't it be great if mankind, if we could all squeeze into each other, if we could all find room for each other.
Yes, it's more abstract.
Yes.
It's more abstract, and I think I just like this is a tragic romance among other things, and it establishes the romantic couple gets together immediately, and the tragedy is that they could have had this incredibly happy life whaling together, and instead they are forever separated by death and the obsession of Captain Ahab.
Yeah, I mean, and if we want to step back a little, okay, Ishmael falls in love with Queequeg. They are happy together. Ahab, the wizard, the colonialist, the white man, the whatever you want him to be, the guy who's not as big as the whale but is a whale himself, takes Queequeg and is like, I'm going to use you.
Yeah, he instrumentalizes
your literal
him.
blood.
Yes!
Because your darkness is useful to me. Your nativeness, your heathenness is useful to me. Not beautiful to me the way it is to Ishmael.
Right.
Right.
Useful
Though
to me.
the thing with the blood is amazing. It's so good.
And I'm going to throw away your husband's life in front of you,
Yeah.
because he is a tool.
That what is left, what saves Ishmael's life, is his husband's coffin.
Yeah.
That, they make perfect for Queequeg. Queequeg, carves it with all his special symbols, thinks he's gonna die, and, that's what they have to be as a life buoy.
And that's why Ishmael is the only survivor.
Yeah. And so the if you want to read this book as anti-racist, despite the fact that Fedallah is just a Satan XP because we wanted one.
Well, Fedallah reads as a checklist for of Orientalist stereotypes of the sinister Oriental.
These aren't the kinds of foreigners I find physically hot, so I'm going to call them evil.
Right, exactly.
I almost wonder if it's more like I've never met
an actual person from Tamil or wherever he's meant to be.
Persia at the time.
Iran.
He's Farsi.
Yeah.
Oh yes, he is. Well, no, I think he's Parsi, which are
Parsi. My bad.
Which are a I believe Iranian descended diasporic group in India.
Oh, they're Zoroastrian refugees. Okay, cool. Oh, we'll pray to Zarathustra, we'll pray just like we used to. I'm a Zarathustra booster, and that's good enough for me. Too soon?
Gotcha. Cool.
Okay, so it is related to.
So it is related. I thought Indian with the turbaned hair, like there was some sort of Sikh adjacent connection or something.
The real thing is that he is a amalgam of a bunch of different Oriental stereotypes.
Yes.
Very clearly.
Mm-hmm. But what were you saying before we got distracted by his what actual race he was?
I don't remember.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did the bad thing. But there's an argument to be made that he's not just an amalgam of racial stereotypes, or
I think it's setting him aside for its treatment of Black and Polynesian characters. The book is at least trying to be anti-racist for its time.
Yes, and even though Pip talks in a sort of I credit to William Hoodkins for not shying away for giving him basically giving him the slave patois voice, because how else are you supposed to read this dialogue?
Well, Uncle Tom's Cabin came out the following year. If you want to know the register we're dealing with here. And keep in mind for everything that we said before, we're 10 years out from the American Civil War.
That he's talking like that. It's very uncomfortable for a
and there's
a
that really
reader.
jarring moment that we already touched on after Pip is fallen into the ocean. There was a bit where I think it's Ahab says something like, well, you're just gonna have to, the time before the time we talked about, when Ahab says we're gonna leave you while we chase down the whale.
I believe
It's
it's
Stubb.
Stubb. Yeah.
It's Stubb.
Yeah.
Stubb says it.
Stubb
says the amount of money that we'll get from this whale leaving you to drown is a heck of a lot more than you would fetch in Alabama.
Right.
Yeah, there's constant asides to slave ships, to auctions. This is something that I think is
It's all intentional, and
Yeah.
Stubb is
Right.
incidentally like the worst person on this ship.
Right, very obviously. Like, this is supposed to be a villain line,
Right.
very specifically.
Actually, but despite this, like, Pip has a soul, Pip has agency, Pip has intelligence. A lot of attention is paid to not just he's gone mad, but the precise, as you said, the precise way in which he has gone mad, the way in which he must look in the world. He is a genuinely pitiable and like interesting character, even though oh God, I mean, speaking of Stubb, the whole sequence with the cook.
Yeah, Stubb basically makes him
That's the
perform
most
for him.
upsetting. Like,
That one is, that's a really
you know,
upsetting
and
scene.
that's just Melville putting contemporary racism on display for
Oh
you.
yeah,
to
no, I
contend
have
with,
no doubt
you
that
know?
he saw stuff like this constantly, and it's infuriating to read.
And we get like everything that we get that's focused on Stubb. We also get like this whole long scene with the Frenchman that's mostly played for laughs, but also like where Stubb makes use of somebody else's lack of English to A, humiliate him, and B, steal an incredibly valuable resource out from under his nose,
Oh, the ambergris,
which
yes.
is the ambergris.
Right.
The following is whale fact number 6.
Which, fun fact, comes from when whales, the only undigestible part of a squid is its beak. And if a whale gets too many squid beaks stuck in its belly, it gives it this like infection that leads to ambergris.
Which smells amazing, apparently. It's the best smelling infection you can have.
Squid beak stomach
in the
cyst
stomach of
thing.
a whale.
So I want to bring this part of the discussion around with another one of the excerpts that I was looking at, and I'm going to give it. It is from the whiteness thing that we've discussed already. The elusive quality it is which causes the thought of whiteness when divorced from more kindly associations, the purity, etc., and coupled with any object terrible in itself to heighten the terror to the furthest bounds. Witness the white bear of the poles and the white shark of the tropics. What but their smooth, flaky whiteness makes them the transcendent horrors they are? And this is saying the natural human being is terrible enough, but it's not white. What's the worst, the most horrible, the most terrifying kind of human being? It's the white human being. And I think that, and Melville is saying, the white man is the devil, I think, in this book. Like, not loudly, but I think he's saying it to the extent that, you can hear that from a white person.
I'm not sure that he's necessarily consciously saying that exactly. I think that part of this book is him wrestling with his whiteness.
Mm-hmm. But it's hard to read that particular chapter in any other way.
Oh no, absolutely. But at the same time, there's also a lot of Go America stuff. And also, Ishmael is very clearly and consciously an unreliable narrator. We can't actually take everything that Ishmael says as textually the words from Melville's mouth.
True. I think that I personally read a lot of the boosterism as sarcastic.
I also tend to read a lot of irony into those passages.
Yeah,
but I think
the Nantucket boosters in particular.
Some of it, but there's a lot of I think that a lot of his, we're better than the foreigners, it's said in the same tone of voice that is, whale oil is better than any other oil. And boy, Ishmael definitely believes that. I mean, I think that there's this thing where, he's kind of poking fun at himself, but also he does still kind of believe it.
I think there's two separate registers. I think when he's like making fun of the French or the English or particularly the Dutch Germans, he is doing the Go America thing.
Right, exactly.
And completely straightforwardly, I agree. But when he is talking about when he's like the superiority of the Nantucketer,
oh yeah,
there's something else happening. And one aspect of that is you guys, don't believe what's going on in Nantucket, which he says over and over again at various things to his audience.
Right.
he's talking to the white middle class, right? And he is saying, you guys don't, whenever we talk about our lived experience, you don't believe us. You think we're exaggerating. You think we're making up stories, which is why I'm citing all of this stuff to support the fact that this story is plausible, and that the horror and the inhumanity and the blood that I'm talking about does really happen. And I have that particular kind of smugness that comes from being at the tip of the spear, Like, I am the person who is the brutality of colonialism, of hunting, of killing. And you are the person who is pretending that it's not real, or that it's not as bad as people say it is, back home in Boston. And I want you to know.
I want you to know what it cost.
Yeah.
Right, but I want you to know what it cost, but he's not saying it's not worth it. There's not like, this is a tragedy, but
He doesn't say it's not worth it.
I do think I disagree. I would disagree with that, just because I think that there's so many registers in which he works in. I think it's more than two. I think it's almost like a moodiness or something, but he's just able to see things from a lot of different viewpoints, and I think he is flipping in and out of not only these characters' voices, but their beliefs, and I think that he ultimately, whaling is horrific to him, and that's why I wanted to bring up cannibalism again, because I think, at least in this latest reading, eating a whale or killing a whale might be worse than killing a person, right? These are like, I think when the little anecdote about slaves finding whale bones, they think it's an angel, right? It's something, and again, this is just another register, but it's something transcendent, right? And that moment where they're in the middle of the pod, right? And it's silent and beautiful, and it's like,
he is super into whales, and he grieves the death of the whales. He goes on and on about how amazing whales are, and he's right. Whales are fantastic. I could go on and on about whales. And at the same time, he also goes on and on about what it means to be a whale man.
Yes. And
that just as the whale is the king of beasts, the whale man ought to be treated as this nobility, a sense of real nobility, and it isn't, and he's hurt about that, and so he goes on for quite a while, where he makes a lot of ridiculous claims about historical heroes and how we can actually understand them as whalemen, and maybe if you think of Queequeg in the same way that you think of Hercules, or that you think of St. George, because he argues that the dragon is clearly a leviathan and therefore a whale, because obviously it is. That's so much cooler than it being
I mean, this is definitely also played for laughs. I just wanted to mention
it's
but,
definitely...
It's still there, and in the middle of all of that, he's like, where is the great American novel about the whale? And it's...
Which,
like...
Yeah. But, basically, my argument isn't that he doesn't see the tragedy. I don't think that you can... I think that trying to cast this as some sort of indictment of the whaling industry is trying to read a modern sensibility back into it.
I partially disagree. I think, as a matter of fact, I will have to say that I completely disagree with that particular assessment.
I mean, well, then let me finish making my argument.
Okay, go for it.
Which is that, yes, he's being sarcastic, but if nothing else, even if you're going to argue that this is completely and completely and 100% sincerely an indictment of the whaling industry and saying that it's not worth it and that it should be shut down right away, which I disagree with. But then you still, if you're going to make that argument, then I think it's a failure, because it is much like all of the, parodies that end up just becoming the thing that they are. This book does actually make a grand romantic tragedy of it. And, even now, you go back and you read it, and there's this sense that there's something great here. And it's not just the whales, it's also the men who are, killing them horribly.
Agreed. I do not think that it's an uncomplicated. I don't think that this is an indictment of whaling.
He doesn't give you an answer. Is the whole
no.
Is
Right.
It's like Ishmael is simultaneously loves whales and loves whaling and loves whalemen. He loves all three of
exactly.
these things. Yeah, but I think that within that he's being very honest about the brutality of whaling, and he's being very honest about the brutality and and horror of being a whaleman. And the fact that many of the whalemen are stupid or evil,
Oh, absolutely.
It's like this is not a didactic book. It's a book. I mean, it's a book that's angry at you, and wants you to be unsettled. But it's not a book that tells you what lesson you're supposed to learn from it.
It didn't do well at all.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
It kind of ruined his writing
career.
This guy wrote like ripping adventure yarns before this.
Well, they were always sort of complicated, but definitely more digestible for your audience. This book is like trying to imagine reading this when it came out.
The edition of the book that I have actually has the back of it, like some excerpts from contemporary reviews of Moby Dick, along with some of his, which are very long. Like, not Moby Dick long, but like this one feels like they spend too much time with Ahab. The intense Captain Ahab is too long drawn out. Something more of him might, we think, be left to the reader's imagination.
It's too long.
How do you think I felt, pal? Says Ishmael.
Alexis, can we say that we were pretty much trying to say the same thing from different angles there?
Yeah, I think so. I felt like because we are modern readers talking about a novel that we all love, I felt like we were spending a lot of time talking about how much it is critical of the whaling industry and how much it is critical of period typical racism. But I don't want to downplay the areas where it's not.
But I think the thing that caused me to prick up my ears and disagree was, I think that this is a startlingly modern book for the era that it was written, like in terms of the layering, the unreliability of the narrator, and partially this is just because it's not as though modernity invented this kind of novel.
Right.
We just tend to think of it as, the modern novel, but like as far back as like Tristram Shandy, as far back as Don Quixote, frankly, this kind of thing was being done. But yeah, I think it's certainly capable of and does bring that kind of ambiguity. And
no, ambiguity is the name of the game, and that's why it's such an incredible work. You can get so much out of it, and you can read it in 100 different ways and still not catch the whole of it, right? Just like the whale, you can measure its bones, you can dissect it.
You can tattoo its measurements on your arm.
I love that you get like halfway through the book before he reveals that.
Right.
It's so funny. Oh, by the way, this whole time
I've had
the measurements of the whale skeleton tattooed on my forearm.
The jawbone of the great blue whale is, in fact, the largest bone of any animal in history. It is larger in every way that you might measure, by mass, by length, than any dinosaur bone or anything else. It is the largest one, the modern blue whale.
Also, if you would like to see a whale skeleton, you should visit the Museum of the Earth in Ithaca before it closes due to lack of money. Because it's got a really nice whale skeleton just hanging there right by the entrance.
And that will count as whale fact number 7.
We'll do that. What kind of whale is it?
I don't remember. Leo, do you
Oh,
remember?
it was a right whale.
It was a
With
right
disgust.
whale.
Some sort of horrible, piffling right whale. Anyway.
The inferior oil of the right whale.
It was a right whale, and I did appreciate the bit having read Ishmael talking about how looking at a whale skeleton doesn't at all give you the sense of it. Like, you'd think they might have fingers, because you can see that they're like flippers of finger bones, but no, they're always wearing mittens, which I just
So cute.
certainly thought about while standing under the whale skeleton looking
He's
at
got
his
a real
fingers.
solid sort of idea of what evolution is for his time.
Yes.
But they're still fish.
Right,
he
but and
says.
yet Ishmael he really wants us to understand that the whale is a kind of fish.
Yes, but that struck me as a hot dog is a sandwich argument rather
Oh,
than a
absolutely.
biological.
Yes,
100%
absolutely.
did.
I mean,
What is
also
a fish?
like
He's like, I acknowledge they're warm-blooded, they have lungs, but look,
Right.
guys, they swim in the ocean, so they're fish. That doesn't mean that they're, you
Yeah.
know, not
I mean,
also
like,
mammals.
Of course they're fish.
right. I mean, like also, the dragon is a whale, which is a fish. Like,
Yes.
Well, the dragon is a mythological interpretation of
Yeah.
what was clearly a whale, you
Whale.
guys.
Right. What else could it have possibly
There's actually
nothing
this,
else is cool enough to make
been? Or big
you know,
enough. Where was they going to find a giant lizard like that in
Yeah.
Turkey?
No, there's actually a lot of historical like kind of merging of a worm, a verm,
The venom.
and a whale, which is why Dune is probably the most famous Moby Dick ripoff of all time, because it's this enormous worm / leviathan that creates this essential,
Substance.
substance
Yeah.
that's used for travel.
That's a good point. One
Yeah.
of many reasons to be contemptuous of Dune. But anyway,
Well,
The-
Ishmael didn't become like God Emperor of Earth.
yeah, that sort of misses the point, doesn't it? Or rather, it interprets it in a different way.
That would have made this a lot worse of a book.
Yes.
Ishmael became
It's-
God
I was
Emperor
there.
of Earth.
That was one of
I
the
think
things
I don't think
that
Ishmael
really...
wants to be God Emperor of Earth.
No, Ishmael doesn't. Ishmael just wants to stare at the horizon pensively and occasionally check out his husband Winnie the Poohing it.
Yes.
No, I do think one of the things that surprised me about this book is that Ishmael, like, because what I knew of it going in, I was like, there's Ishmael, there's Ahab, there's a whale, and that Ishmael is such a non-entity on the ship that, like, he really is clearly, I saw a very funny post recently that referred to him as Queequeg's spousal hire, but, like,
Yes,
he
very much
totally
so.
is. He signs on for, like, 1/300th of a share, while Queequeg, who actually has talent, gets, you know, 1/50th or something.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
this is also going leaping way back to kind of sticking up for whalemen, but like these wages are nothing. These wages
Oh,
are
no.
piddling. The whole like economics and industry of this is like these sailors are risking their lives and like getting very little sleep for a ridiculously low amount of money.
Yeah, and the book establishes this very clearly when
Yeah.
Ishmael is like, well, I feel like I should at least be getting 275th.
270.
And then
And
they
then
won't,
gets less.
and then gets less. And even the other guy on, the hiring committee is like, really? That little?
And Ishmael, who, to be clear, is completely broke at this point, and the only money he has is
What Queequeg
gave him. It's like, well, at least I have guaranteed room and board for 3
Yeah.
years.
So that's.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. That gives me a nice jumping off point to talk about the way that this book is remembered and thought of in America, because
Yes,
Yeah.
which
You
I
know,
think we should definitely talk about.
Yeah.
we have the modern retelling of if Dune is the like modern American retelling of Moby Dick, it's like Dune is Moby Dick where we're pretty much more
Well, no, Blood Meridian would be.
okay.
Dune is its own thing.
All right.
I'm sorry for bringing it up, but I just thought it was interesting. Not a lot of people like recognize that like connection. So.
The point is that Mr. Bartleby the Scrivener here, Melville, is not a gung ho capitalist.
Right.
I'll just put it that way. He is not uncomplicatedly in favor of colonial expansion and industrialization and sucking out all the world's natural resources
And animal
and animal abuse,
slaughter.
He's which he pays a lot of attention to. He loves he has a very interesting aside about the bison.
Yeah.
So this book is out of step with a lot of the way America thinks about itself, despite being the great American novel. And I think that
Well, I think that's part of what makes it the great American novel.
yes,
Is that it's wrestling with all this stuff.
yeah, but and as you say, it doesn't give an answer, which is something that a worse book would do. but I think that there's a defensive reaction that that American popular understanding tends to have when faced with stuff that is critical of bosses and authority, and that is to be like, oh, this isn't for you. You know, normal people wouldn't be interested in this book. It's too hard. It's too boring. It's too abstract. It's for the elites. You know, you might be forced to read it in school, but you probably actually won't, because then you would have to discuss it. It's just sort of thing, well, at least we're not reading this. You know, we'll read The Scarlet Letter, which by Nathaniel Hawthorne, who Melville was madly in love with.
Melville was definitely in love. I will say that this book also contains some excerpts of letters from Melville to Hawthorne. And, like, you know, if I had read this before the wedding, I might have used some of these quotes.
He moved his entire family to, like, very near where Hawthorne lived, and then sent him, like, a very cringy, faux casual letter, like, oh, hey! By the way,
I just happened to be in the neighborhood
sometime.
If the world was entirely made up of Magians, I'll tell you what I should do. I should have a paper mill established at one end of the house, and so have an endless ribbon of foolscap rolling in upon my desk, and upon that endless ribbon I should write 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 thoughts, all under the form of a letter to you.
Oh my god.
Because thy magnet is on you, and my magnet responds.
Oh my god.
Yes. 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 Calm down, Herman. But
calm down, ye say?
Down when Moby Dick still roams the
While
oceans.
Moby Dick still lives.
So Melville hunting his white whale, who was kind of, you know, Puritan-coded Nathaniel Hawthorne aside.
Kind of.
Extremely Puritan-coded Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Moby Dick was going to be just like another adventure story, and then Hawthorne and him were writing, and he was like, actually, I'm gonna make this like the best novel
all art is
you've ever
libidinal.
read
All art is
to impress
libidinal.
you, Nathaniel Hawthorne.
It's all feathering your nest. It's all creating your bower. That's the only reason anybody ever makes art is to
I
find
don't
your
think that's
bower.
true.
Sometimes people make art because they're depressed and would otherwise want to knock off people's hats.
Anyway, I feel like we got off track again, much like Ishmael.
Yes, there are nested diversions here. Let's talk about the lieutenants. Let's talk about.
I thought we were wrapping up.
No, let's not.
No, but also I want to argue with you a little bit about your characterization of why, like, this is a very good socialist podcast, pushing back, you know. But I think that it's not just about, oh, it's not for you because it's elite. I think that this is also, we have this idea, like, our education system has really failed people in analyzing books, and thus, but I don't think this is but I do not think that this is solely to prop up capitalism. Speaking as somebody who has taught English in a communist country,
communism. Well, first of all, did you just call us a socialist podcast, or were you accusing?
No, I was accusing you of trying to make us a socialist podcast.
Wait,
but,
can I interject really quick?
Please.
Please.
The masculinity of this book, I think, also contributes to that, if that makes any sense. Like,
yeah, it's
and the queerness of this book.
Well, I mean, I think that's, you were saying that
I just meant
the masculinity
the
of this book
culture
makes it hard to sell to, like, to sort of progressive-minded people.
I think that's the point I'm trying to make
now.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Once again, with the giant dick thrusting out of the ocean.
Yeah, but I think that the queerness of the book is part of what makes people reluctant to talk about it, honestly, to talk about a lot of the emotional resonance in there. Mm-hmm. And to talk about just how fascinating the narrator is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not wrapping it up because
Ishmael voice.
Because much as this book uses the largest words that can be found in the largest dictionary by Mr. Dr. Johnson,
written by the largest man,
a very fat man who wrote a very large dictionary from which I've got very large words to discuss the very large animal that is the whale.
I I love when he's like, my hand hurts from writing Moby Dick, because it's such a huge book.
If any of our podcasts is going to hit 2 hours or get close to hitting 2 hours, this is going to be the one.
Well, you're the one who's
You're
gonna
the one
edit
who,
it, so.
right? And also, you're the one who has the Super Bowl.
I'm taking this cheerfully upon myself. We will wrap up so we can see what Kendrick's going to do. But I do want to talk about the mates. I want to talk about what I think are 3 archetypes of middle management in Flask, Stubbs, and Starbuck, which are the idiot, the nihilist, and the coward.
Yes.
Because these are all 3 people who are...
Or maybe the enabler or something.
Yeah. These are 3 people who are like well aware of what's going on. They're making orders of magnitude more than the people who they're sending out to die.
Oh yeah, they have first-hand knowledge of how crazy Ahab is.
Yeah, they know that Ahab's going to get them all killed. And they deal with this in 3 distinct ways, which you probably will have encountered in a boss of yours at one point in the past. One of Flask, the one who's like built like a fire plug.
He's built like a plank. He's just kind of there.
Flask is just a moron.
Yes.
Flask is able to deal with what's going on by not having a thought in his head.
He's like competent enough to do the job.
But
in front of him.
He has no internality whatsoever.
No.
Yeah.
Even when he gets a soliloquy, it's not.
Yes. He's materialist. He's like
doop de doop.
It's a coin.
Yay, let's get some money.
What's the big deal? Yeah.
Then we have Stubb, who knows exactly what's going on and knows that he's probably going to die, but is like, my personal, I am the laughing, crying emoji,
Basically.
I am like,
I'm going to have fun.
This is the world. If I'm going to die, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to eat my whale steak bloody raw and racistly abuse a 90-year-old man while I'm doing it because it's what I like to do.
Yep.
And I'm going to, and actually I think that there's an element where Melville or Ishmael, whoever you want to say, sort of is sees himself in Stubb. Because I think that the way that Stubb cajoles his boat crew, which is one of my favorite things in the whole book, the way that he is like...
But slowly, my darlings, don't rush. But what are you waiting for? That kind of thing.
He goes back and forth between like being funny and gentle
kind
and funny
mincing
and mincing and like doing a whole little, ho to do, and then, and like, move, you motherfuckers, and then like back and forth, which...
Pull my fine hearts alive. Pull my children, pull my little ones. Why don't you break your backbones, my boys? What is it you stare at? Those chaps in yonder boat, there are only 5 more hands come to help us. Never mind from where. The more the merrier. Pull then, do pull, never mind the brimstone. Devils are good fellows enough. There you are now, that's the stroke for 1,000 pounds. That's the stroke to sweep the stakes. Hurrah for the gold cup of sperm oil, my heroes. 3 cheers, men. Easy. Don't be in a hurry. Don't be in a hurry. Why, just snap your arms, you rascals. Bite something, you dogs. So, then softly. That's it. Long and strong. Give way there. Give way, the devil fetch ye, you ragamuffin rapscallions. You're all asleep. Stop snoring, you sleepers, and pull! Pull, will you? Pull, can't you? Pull, won't you? Why in the name of gudgeons and ginger cakes don't you pull? Pull and break something. Pull and start your eyes out. Here! Every mother's sonny who draw his knife and pull with the blade between his teeth. That's it. Now you do something. That looks it, my steel bits. Start her, my silver spoons. Start her, marling spikes.
Well,
Melville says...
This is why earlier I said, or I didn't say this, but I'm willing to give Melville the benefit of the doubt when it comes to irony, because there are so many things, it's not just like funny on the surface, like Ahab goes out like a fucking Looney Tunes character.
Yes, he does.
Oh.
He says at one point, like, the universe might be a practical joke, right? So I agree with you in the Stubb parallel there.
I think that Melville, in sort of his darkest hour, feels like he is Stubb. And actually, this is how Moby Dick came up the first time in the Wizzlies, because you were comparing Mother Desane to Ahab.
That's right.
The way that Mother Desane goes out, in her in her like monomaniacal pursuit of the mountain is also Looney Tunes. You know?
Yes.
In much the same way that Ahab comically lynching himself, so he goes whoop, like at 50 miles an hour, exit
what?
stage left, like he's
Yeah.
been, like God has taken the big hook and yanked him off stage.
I could not believe it when I first read this book. It's like, kidding me?
Right? Like all this build up. And
But
you're like, no, technically that does fulfill the prophecy.
it's true.
It does.
We fulfilled the prophecy in the stupidest possible way, and now you're dead, and so is everybody else. Great.
Right.
But
yes.
But yeah, so Stubb, who is the nihilist crying laughing, hey, it's the world, what are you gonna do?
Also a boss
it's shit
that,
and it's
like,
supposed to be shit.
You might like this boss because he might be funny. He's
Right.
not going to have your back when,
No, he's gonna,
upper management fucks you over,
he's
right?
He's not going to go back to pick you up
gonna
off the
leave you.
whaleboat.
Yeah.
He's going to leave you to drown, and specifically says,
You're not worth the money to me.
you're not worth the money
Yeah.
that we could do selling you into slavery.
Yeah.
But I think Stubbs is also, that sort of, I don't want to make too many comparisons to contemporary politics, but like the attitude of, it does not matter how much damage I'm doing to myself, so long as I get to be an asshole and also funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's an archetype that is very,
real.
very American and very real.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not endemic to America. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
But, like, it's very present in America and in England, weirdly. And yeah, no, you've seen Stubb. You've met Stubb.
I've worked with Stubb.
Stubbs would absolutely drain his own drinking water reservoir to own the libs. But then we have Starbuck,
Yeah.
a man who does not deserve to have an awful coffee chain named after him. But who is also,
They didn't even like the book. They just chose it because they remembered he existed and it sounded cool.
Yeah, well, I mean,
The
if they
indignity of
they
it.
liked the book, they probably wouldn't have created a giant multinational chain. But, I mean, maybe that's me over-egging the power of art. But
I think that is you over-egging the power of art, I'm afraid.
yeah, it's sad. I am myself a little naive at times, but
It's all right, Ishmael. Go on.
well,
Go on. Tell us about the third type of middle manager that you will encounter.
Yes, in this. Excuse me, I have a footnote about that. There might be a subtype of middle manager type
Please,
thing.
go on. I am but a stupid landlubber.
Yes, let me explain to you, Kiana, about
Yes, the
third.
third type, the fourth secret type is the carpenter, but we'll get to him.
Ah.
The coward, or as you might call him, some might call him the enabler, who actually knows what's going on and has a conscience and a soul. And in this case, it's because Starbuck is actually believes in God,
Yeah.
almost uniquely.
I think
Right.
so. I think so.
And which gives him a sort of holy aura that even Ahab respects to a certain extent. And if he were not a coward, he might have been able to do something.
Anything.
Anything.
Literally
because
anything.
He's the only man who could possibly have changed this.
Right. The thing is that there's this moment where if he'd pushed, who knows? But if he'd pushed, this whole
What do
thing
you mean if
might
he pushed?
have
If
been.
he pulled the trigger, he literally had a gun
Right.
pointed at
There's a
Ahab.
whole scene. He's standing there with a gun that Ahab has already pointed at him.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
And
good point.
So it's justifiable. Like,
Yeah, no. If it is morally, ethically, in any way that you could say
and-
the right thing to do at the time. Economically, he's about to save the boat, which is really worth a lot of money.
right?
You know,
Like
And all
he
the
would be
oil that they've already
acting on
collected.
behalf of the shareholders if he'd pulled
Yes.
the trigger.
in
Yes.
every respect, it would have been the right
he
thing
would
to
have
do to
been
murder
able
this
to
guy.
return home to his children, who, he does attempt to, like, of all of the things that he tries to do to convince Ahab to turn away, he, like, as a last-ditch effort is like, but think of your children! And Ahab doesn't care.
Look, actually, though,
believe
That
that Ahab
Ahab's
has
a dad.
a normal wife and kid. It made me so angry when I first read that part. I was like, what is your problem, man? What is your problem?
I don't think he actually knows them very well.
No, he doesn't. I think...
So I do want to note, actually, that one of the other things that, almost that had the chance to save the ship and didn't is, in fact, shareholder value. So which somewhat complicates the anti-capitalist message of the book. Even Ahab is like, oh no, if I don't at least make a token gesture to appease the shareholders, my quest of obsession is going to immediately be stopped.
I do not believe that Melville knew the word capitalism.
I also must note, for historical reasons, we're 16 years out from Das Kapital.
So
Right.
I'm not going to say that it's a one-to-one here.
We can also say Melville worked in a customs house while he was writing this. And I did at one point read a very funny bit of someone who was like, when I learned this fact, I couldn't believe that America's great novelist was wasted on a custom house. But the more I learned about custom houses at this time, I was like, well, great authors are a dime a dozen, but an honest worker at the customs house in this period?
Yeah, Bartleby the Scrivener is the least surprising
Right.
story of all time to read after knowing that.
Oh man, I as a person who's worked a government job for the last 5 years, my knees and I sympathize with all of this. But
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so Starbuck is, I mean, that scene with him standing with the rifle is one of my favorite scenes. It's just so well done, and it's like, yes, it's cowardice, it's his Quaker roots, right, which
Yeah.
we haven't really touched on, but all of
His
and thou in this
pacifism.
book is it was outdated at the time because the Quakers have this.
yeah, it's a nice sort of excuse for
King
getting into
James Bible.
Shakespearean language in a sort of a backwards way.
It's a synchronicity. It's like
Yeah.
it all works together really really well. But yeah, and so Starbuck's pacifism, right, against people at least.
Oh, by the way, sorry, this is another one, but in whether this book is, pro-labor or not, I just want to mention the story.
I'm done with dichotomies. This book contains
Right.
everything. But
Yes.
go on.
The story of steel kilt and punching the boss.
Oh, that one's great.
To bring that all into our minds, but anyway.
Yes.
But
I love that story is like still very homosocial and homoerotic because it's like, Steel Kilt is so beautiful and strong.
He's so
I resent him. That got expanded into Billy Budd, which was his last work before he died.
But anyway, yes. So Starbuck simply could not act upon his conscience, or rather, his conscience demanded two things. One of which was to be a good Quaker Christian pacifist, and the other one of which is to save everybody's lives. And he chose the wrong one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and you will find a good person as your boss, occasionally, and they're probably not sleeping very well.
And, you also get the boss who means well and who knows that the things that upper management is asking of them are going to screw stuff up for you. And despite knowing this, they are going to do their darndest to implement those policies because that's their job, and they're gonna do their job.
Oh, Leora, I'm having a handshake meme with Leora right now as people
Yes.
are slightly further down the organizational ladder than Alexis currently is. But yes.
At what point have I argued that against labor?
At no point. At
Never.
no point.
You have never
At
once.
no point.
I would never
I
accuse
hasten
you
to
of that.
I hasten to point
I
this
have
out.
no supervisory power over anybody whatsoever, and I have two bosses at like equal level.
Yes. Meanwhile, if any of you reading this have supervisory power over everybody reading this, listening to this, I've killed the joke by using the wrong word, but yes, no, you're a bad person.
You want to take it from the top? And...
Just okay. Excuse me. If any of you listening to this do have supervisory power, you're one of these three archetypes that I've enumerated, and you should feel bad about yourself. Okay.
And then we get the other officers on the ship, the other non-regular enlisted people, who you have the harpooners, who are
Skilled labor.
extra elite but still basically a tool of the management. But you also have the carpenter and the blacksmith, who are extremely necessary, who are there because when you are on a boat for 3 years, things are inevitably going to go wrong, and you can't bring backup parts for everything, so you just bring the backup materials. And so you get that person who, like, the carpenter is just doing his job. He doesn't have supervisory power. He doesn't really... He does have say over, like, what wood there is and what they can do with it. And so that archetype of, like, the one focus. This is the part of this enterprise that I have control over, and I'm going to do my best job with it, and everything else I'm just completely uninterested in. Like,
And that you could accuse me of.
Nobody's accusing. This is not a struggle session. Nobody's accusing anybody of anything.
I really
This
love...
is not a leftist podcast. Despite what you may have heard.
I really love the part where where the carpenter is asked to build Queequeg's coffin and then kind of hovers around impatiently like, well, are you ready to
really
die
good
and
job.
get my great coffin?
I think there's a...
And then he's kind of like insulted when he's asked to tar it up and use it as a life buoy.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you...
I love that.
Yes.
It's so good.
But
And
I put so much
that's
effort
really
into this coffin.
the scene that I was thinking
Yeah.
of when I brought up the carpenter. Of,
Yeah.
Like,
Another thing, I do want to bring up another thing about the carpenter, though, which is because he's the craftsman and doesn't care to what use his tools are put. He's also a little voice among many that Melville puts in the book to criticize the book.
Oh, true.
Because
true.
like the carpenter is talking about all these modern rush jobs where you just take a bit of this and a bit of that and the ending of this and this.
Yeah,
and
the
and you
beginning
just
is
put
the
it-
ending.
The beginning is the
ending
ending, and the ending is
beginning.
the beginning, and you put it all together. Just
Some parts of it are
willy-nilly.
prose, some parts of it are like a play.
Yeah, there's
Some parts
all
of it
these
are
whale facts in
scientific,
here.
yeah.
It's like somebody wrote a book on whales and then wrote an adventure novel and sawed them both up and then nailed them both together.
And then and all his angst and feelings about God got in there somehow.
Yeah.
like getting nailed, that one bit where the albatross's wing gets nailed
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
to the post, like in, I think it's,
Is that as the
I
ship is
think
going
it's
down?
as the ship is going down. It's right at the very end. It's like Tashtigo's dying
Last
moment.
is
that
to-
he's got this hammer still up and is trying to nail the flag to the mast, and the Skyhawk is diving down in search of Carrion and gets his wings stuck there, and so like they're bringing the angel down with them.
It's a skyhawk.
It says Skyhawk.
There,
but
yeah, the albatross does come
it's
up
still
earlier.
the bird of heaven with archangelic shrieks and his imperial beak thrust upwards and his whole captive form folded in the flag of Ahab went down with his ship, which, like Satan, would not sink to hell until she had dragged a living part of heaven along with her.
Yes. But I was also like, if you want to read that as part of the animals that are even more terrifying when they're white, which is the last time that albatrosses came up, there's Tashtego, being like, nope, I'm bringing you down with me.
But that one's not an albatross.
But it's not an albatross, so never mind.
I just realized, we've spent almost none of this podcast talking about Moby Dick, the whale, which is...
Well, he doesn't show
is
up
perfect.
until, the last few bits. It's not really about him.
There's
No, I know, I'm saying it's thematically... I mean,
Yeah.
I have a lot to say about Moby Dick, the whale.
Well, please
In
go
it.
ahead.
I have a lot to say about whales.
How about Leora gives a couple whale facts, and then I'll give my piece,
Yes.
if that's amenable.
Go for it.
Absolutely. So,
And now comes whale fact number 8.
here's a whale fact. One of the ways in which whales are hugely important to the ocean ecosystem is that they eat fish. They dive down to eat fish that are on lower levels of the ocean and come back up, and then they poop. And their poop, rains down and brings nutrients back up, where all of these nutrients might otherwise all gravitate to the ocean floor and stay there. Whales are part of this circulation, and we're not actually sure what that looks like at full health of the ecology, because by the time we were looking at it, whale populations were already super down.
Due to whaling.
Due to whaling. and that not just, like, the killing of the whales, but also, like, we didn't just kill whales, we took the whales out of the water and took every bit of their body, and so that prevented whale fall, which is another really important ecological thing, that a whale dies and falls to the bottom of the ocean, and that creates an entire ecosystem around the skeleton of the whale for years afterwards.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I love those whale fall videos.
Yeah,
Sort
and
of
because
see all these
hundreds of
critters on
thousands
there.
of whales were removed, like, just a huge amount of biomass that was there, and part of the ecosystem in the cycle, and that having all been removed, we're not exactly sure. Even though the efforts to save the whales, and this is something that I think doesn't get talked about enough, because either people are anti-environmentalist or people are having a lot of environmental dread. But, like, whale numbers are actually going noticeably back up.
That was one of the things that Ishmael got right.
The efforts to save the whales are working. They're doing well. And that's amazing. But we're not entirely sure, like, what that's going to look like in the future as the oceans get warmer. And also, just what removing all those whales did change the whole ecosystem.
It did something to the ecosystem, and we don't know exactly what, because we never got to see it when it was healthy.
Ishmael does argue that they will never manage to hunt the whales to extinction for reasons of essentially just the limited ability of mankind's endeavors. And of course, this book was written pre-industrialization, and so he didn't know what mechanization would do to those numbers.
Yeah.
But the thing that ended up saving the whales was that we found other easier to access sources of oil, and so it became kind of a legacy thing that nobody was doing anymore except out of sheer bloody-mindedness.
There's a small amount, like, that still happens in Iceland, that, like, there's a very limited number of whales that they're allowed to hunt per year, and it's all very...
For like, cultural reasons.
Yeah.
You could say that Moby Dick is a proto-existentialist piece, because there's a lot of it about the absurdity and futility of human endeavor in here.
Yeah.
And you do spend the entire book waiting for the whale to show up, so you could do like a Waiting for Godot pastiche called Waiting for Dick if you wanted to.
And it would still be more heterosexual than this novel.
So, Kiana, will you please give us Moby Dick?
Yes, I would just say my final piece on the whale itself, which is that if you're reading this book, pay attention to the chase, the 3 chapters, it's split into 3 days, and how Moby Dick behaves every day is different, and you can read this in a lot of different ways. Everyone is reading everything onto Moby Dick, right? Mm-hmm. His scarred hieroglyphic forehead gets mentioned, and this comes up a ton and has to do with, like, meaning versus meaninglessness, right? Do the markings mean anything?
Do the tattoos on Queequeg's skin mean anything?
Right,
Is
do
he
they
a
actually...
human? Is this language? Is it not?
Do they actually tell the future? The coffin that Ishmael floats on also has the tattoos copied on there. But basically every day, at one point Moby Dick looks like he's targeting Ahab, playing with him, right? The next he's running away, like he's scared, right? The next he's like seemingly angry for no reason. It's like, is this a wild animal or not, right? And I think Melville does an incredible job at making that ambiguous on purpose. So I would just say, if you're reading this book, pay attention to that, because there's a lot of interesting contradictions there. And it could be Ishmael,
But yeah, so the question of whether the whale knows Ahab is not answered. I have my own feelings about it, but there you go. Do you think that we're done?
I think that's a good note to end it on.
Wow.
I don't think it's,
Yeah.
I mean, we barely scratched the surface, but there's a lot of surface to scratch and to
So much
we've carved our
surface.
hieroglyphics on the surface of the whale, but
We
we
need
have
to
not.
spiralize the skin off.
I love the word spiralizing that he keeps going back to.
Oh, yeah.
It's also textually about depression spiraling.
Uh-huh.
he makes that point.
I did like the bit where he talks about how he's really bad at the job of being on the mast, except he does that part in third person. He's like, one who is prone to philosophizing might end up, and like it's very clear that he's the one.
It's almost as if these guys should not have hired a depressed twink with artistic,
and philosophical preoccupations.
That's why he's the spousal hire.
Thank you guys so much. This was so fun. This is possibly my favorite book.
Thank you, Kiana, for initiating this, and also thank you, Kiana, for making me publicly commit in recorded form to reading Moby Dick, because
I'm so happy you did.
If I had not been given both a deadline and, having given my word, I would never have gotten around to reading it, and it was a very enjoyable experience.
Yay!
Yay. Yes, everybody read Moby Dick.
Really? Seriously, everyone, read Moby Dick.
Mm-hmm. And the audiobook by William Hootkins, it's almost like a play.
It really feels like a play.
If you need that, and I did, so, there's also that.
Oh yeah, for context, Isaac and I listened to it driving across the country, which was maybe the most American thing you can do.
Yeah.
While eating like chicken from a gas station.
Yeah.
And I was wearing like a trucker hat. Yeah, it was great.
And we were driving through Texas looking at oil derricks.
In a Jeep.
Yeah.
In a Jeep.
In a Jeep.
Okay, don't dox me, please.
We're not going to give out the license plate number of the Jeep.
I'm getting the Subaru furry sticker to put over the Jeep logo, okay? It's just not here yet.
That's a lot more identifying.
That's a lot more identifying, Isaac. Now you're doxing yourself.
Oh, wait, one more thing. Isaac made a hilarious point that I hadn't picked up on, which is that Ishmael is like a hipster. Like when he comes on the Pequod for the first time, he's like, oh yes, this ship is so old and crungly.
Yes.
It's perfect.
This is so genuine.
Ishmael is absolutely a hipster.
Yeah. And his name is Ishmael. Oh, he says, call me
Right.
Ishmael.
Call
which
me
gets into all
Ishmael.
of this stuff about like having
Yes.
been cast out by one's father and in need
He's
of
an orphan.
water and all of that.
And Ahab himself is also a biblical
Yes.
name, which they talk about in text. Ishmael's like, that's kind of a cursed name.
Right.
And they're
Yeah.
like, please don't bring that up around him.
It is great when your narrator is like, yeah, this is a bit on the nose.
There's actually a lot of that in the first bit, which I really like. You'll see all these omens, like the crossed, what is it? The crossed harpoons or something, and he's like,
And
Well-
he keeps
Wow.
being like, well, that's subtle. You almost get the sense that he's ignoring the omens because, it's too on the nose. Like,
It's almost like
How have we not
insulting.
been there?
It's
you
insulting.
look for these esoteric, reasons what's going on with your life, and then you finally break down and go to therapy, and it's like, well, it's your mom, and you're like, oh,
come on.
come on, cringe.
we got my mom in there, so now we can finally end the episode.
We don't hear anything about Ishmael's parents at all.
No.
Well, he's an orphan
He's
in
an
the sea.
orphan.
He's an orphan,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, yes, aside from lack
All right.
of women entirely, a really fantastic book.
All right. Well,
And one more thing.
About whales. Would you like? Oh, and a whale fact, a short whale fact, for the love of God, but a whale fact to end us with. That would
A short whale fact.
There aren't any short whales.
Oh, the whale!
what? A short fact with the enormity of the whale?
And now it's time for whale fact number 9. The cartoonist B. Clibben once drew a strip in which a group of rabbis are standing on a dock pointing at a sperm whale. And the rabbis say, "Avail!" And the sperm whale says, "Avail yourself." And I can't find this on the internet. Can somebody find it for me?
Also, yeah,
I
Moby
will
Dick will
say that,
rewrite your brain chemistry.
Ishmael mentions a proto whale known as the Basilosaurus, and that is
Ooh.
in fact a proto whale. But what he doesn't mention is that it's a whale that's in between the mammals on the sea and in the water, on the land and going into the water, and the Basilosaurus has tiny little feet, legs.
Aw.
The way that like a T-Rex
Little
has tiny
vestigial
little
legs.
vestigial arms that like look silly. that's what the Basilosaurus is like with its legs.
Excellent.
That's a
Amazing.
great
Whale.
whale fact.
Somebody
Thank
draw
you.
that, please. I'm sure they have already.
I
I'm
will
gonna go
send
look for
you a
drawings.
picture of the diagram in the book.
Good.
Perfect.
It is Spying on Whales by Nick Pyenson. Sorry, the library stickers over that, which I was reading alongside Moby Dick and quite enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we will end this because we need to find out what Kendrick's about to do.
All right, have fun.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Whale fact number 10 is that whales are cool and everybody should care.